giving you a live look at the White House in Washington, D.C. Windy conditions there this Thursday morning, as you can see the flag waving back and forth atop of the White House. This morning, we're looking at what the upcoming Trump presidency looks like, as Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth met Wednesday with moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins, one of the GOP lawmakers he will have to try to convince to support him. Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram joins us from Capitol Hill with the latest.
Cabinet congestion in the congressional corridors. So many nominees circulating through the Senate, they even run into each other.
Here comes Pete Hegseth. So we're gonna do a switch off here. This is where details have a confluence in the hall. Do you know Mr. Hegseth?
Oh, yeah. Nice to see you. Doing good. How are you doing?
Doing all right. At least they're following you now.
Yeah. They're switching to you.
Defense Secretary selection Pete Hegseth met for more than an hour with Maine Republican Susan Collins, a possible swing vote on nominees.
I obviously always wait until we have an FBI background check, and one is underway.
Hegseth is okay with that.
Certainly prudent. Why wouldn't they? And we welcome that background check.
Hegseth is trying to address concerns that he opposes women in combat.
We support all women serving in our military today who do a fantastic job across the globe in our Pentagon and deliver critical aspects, all aspects, combat included.
Trump nominees now fanning out for sessions with Democrats. DHS Secretary nominee Kristi Noem spoke with Senator Gary Peters, the current Democratic chairman of the Homeland Security Committee.
We've just had great conversations with Senator Peters, and I think Republicans and Democrats in this country recognize how important Homeland Security is.
Some nominees, like Commerce Secretary pick Howard Lutnick, securing positive reviews from the top Senate Democrat.
I've known Howard Lutnick for many years. He's an intelligent and capable man.
Pennsylvania Democrat John Fetterman says he is a, quote, hard yes on the nomination of Elise Stefanik for UN ambassador. Another controversial nominee begins his rounds next week, RFK Jr., to run Health and Human Services. On Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, Fox News.
Chad, thank you. And a lot to dissect in the political realm. So we want to bring in David Grasso, political analyst, to the conversation. David, good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Always interesting in Washington, D.C., isn't it?
Look, always a pleasure to have you. I will say when we heard that remark, here comes Hegseth, I saw you chuckle. So let's go ahead and get into it. For those who don't know who he is, set the stage for us. And what does he represent for a Trump presidency?
Pete Hegseth, that's who you were asking about?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Pete Hegseth was the weekend host at Fox News for many, many years, and is a combat veteran educated at Princeton and Harvard. And as someone who is fairly young, you know, in politics these days, you really don't see 44-year-olds being taken seriously. So Pete was put forward as one of Trump's nominees. And there's been a lot of controversy because, like many people who get nominated in today's world, there's a lot of digital evidence that was used against him, as well as off-the-record people saying he had women problems, drinking problems, etc. And it was assumed that his nomination was dead in the water. And suddenly, in the past week, it's been revived. So basically, here's how the nominees work. You could only get, given the future Senate composition of 53-47, remember there's 100 members of the Senate, 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats, only 3 Republicans can peel off from supporting one of Trump's nominees. If any more than that peel off, that's assuming all Democrats vote against his nominees, then they don't get confirmed. That's why Matt Gaetz didn't make it through the finish line, and now we're focused on Pete Hegseth, who is supposed to be the Secretary of Defense.
David, and as we further discuss these nominees, how important is GOP support on Capitol Hill so that President-elect Trump can have the cabinet that he really wants to, in his opinion, have a successful term?
So this is a really interesting question, right? Because there are 2 competing theories on this, right? One is that Trump won the election decisively and deserves a blank check to form his cabinet. And that's something that's been echoed by members such as Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, et cetera. There's the other side of the equation, which says, hey, this institution exists to check and balance people like the incoming Trump administration. Now, what's really interesting here is that some people say, well, the Trump administration is already using their political capital on people, never mind important things like reducing federal spending, getting a handle on immigration, fighting a potential trade war, etc. So these are two schools of thought. All we know really is that when an administration comes in, their first 100 days is critically important. And hopefully this fight with the Senate to get these nominees approved doesn't already sour the administration's relationship with the Senate, because they will need their support.
You raise an interesting point, because we know that even though there is a high count of Republicans as it relates to Capitol Hill, there's a divide within the Republican Party. And we saw that with the recent election. You have people like former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who say that he feels that President-elect Trump represents a different type of Republican Party. Do you think that will cause any type of strain on President-elect Trump, as he is saying he wants to have more unity within his party?
Yeah, and that's a huge issue in both parties, right? We've seen this in the Democratic Party with, the squad like AOC and whatnot. I really think that this was laid bare with a interview with Mitch McConnell, who was, of course, the Senate Majority Leader for many years and a fantastic fundraiser for the Republican Party. And he basically came out and said that the MAGA movement is very different than the traditional Republican Party. And this schism isn't going away. Now, it depends. In politics, as we say, there are always strange bedfellows in politics. Speaking of strange bedfellows, some of these nominees are even meeting with Democrats to make sure that they make it across the finish line. So, as I say in many of my media appearances about this issue, it's never over till it's over with the nominees. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched.
And knowing that it's not over, what can we expect to see in the coming days? For many people, they think that President-elect Donald Trump has been moving very rapidly for these cabinet picks so that come Inauguration Day, he can hit the ground running.
Yeah, and that's exactly what most Republican senators would say. Hey, he won the election decisively. We need to give him deference and appoint the people that he's handpicked. But there are several nominees who are going to have issues. And what's really interesting is it's like a seesaw, right? As we focus on one, we tend to not focus on the others, but there are several that are in the limelight. You already mentioned Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth, and then there's Director of National Intelligence nominee Tulsi Gabbard. Former Hawaii Congresswoman famously went to go visit Bashir al-Assad, the former dictator of Syria, who was recently deposed, and that's a whole other thing, has been accused of, spouting Russian propaganda, but is also a decorated war veteran, someone who's very respected in Washington. And then, of course, there's RFK Jr., which we could write a book about the Kennedy family in American politics. And this is just the latest chapter in controversy around a Kennedy in Washington.
David, always a pleasure to have you join us here on Live Now from Fox to talk politics. Anything else you'd like to add before we let you go? Anything you're keeping a watchful eye on?
I'm really interested to see what Democrats cross over and support one of Trump's nominees. Already we heard Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman is going to support Elise Stefanik. So that's really interesting. And I think there will be more. Already we saw in the clip that Chuck Schumer is inclined to support Howard Lutnick, who is likely the incoming Secretary of Commerce. So politics is never as neatly divided as you might think it is, between Democrats and Republicans, as well within parties between like the MAGA movement and traditional Republicans. So let's wait and see exactly who sails through this confirmation process.
It's definitely a wait and see game. David Grosso, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great and safe rest of your day.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.